by this invitation from the Indian Academy of Sciences to join former and current leaders of the country's aerospace community in this centenary recall of what so many of us have surely experienced as a defining relationship in our respective professional lives, our memorable associations with Professor Satish Dhawan. What I intend to say is an annotated short form of an invited contribution that is slated to appear in a forthcoming issue, I understand, of Current Science, which I have titled as Satish Dhawan, Refractions from Another Time. That contribution, I should add, has been made in association with my friend and former colleague, Y.S. Rajan, in the Systems Planning and Analysis Group, which was formed by Professor Dhawan as a sort of internal think tank of ISRO and also as a planning group. But of course, I alone am responsible for what follows. We have already heard extensively from the very distinguished former and current chairman of ISRO about Professor Dhawan's foundational role in the evolution of ISRO's programs, his attention to detail in the engineering rigor with which these were executed, also the use to the maximum what were then only nascent capabilities in our industry, particularly the aeronautical industry. As has been related by others, these have now matured into internationally competitive capabilities in space-related products and services. So what I will say here will mostly be about my interactions with what I call, whom I've called somewhat affectionately SD, on matters concerning the warp and weft of his concerns with the fashioning of the nation's S&T broader S&T policy outside of ISRO. Those contributions were made by Satish Dhawan at a special time in the country's post-independence history, the times soon after the liberation of Bangladesh. However, I do also intend to take this opportunity to say something about Sriharikota, the space launch island north of Chennai that SD particularly cared about, that has also been mentioned. As is widely known, that island is now appositely named in his remembrance as the Satish Dhawan Space Center. The scientific policy resolution of the Government of India was passed by Parliament in 1958 and has acquired something of a mythological quality about it. Why it was so titled is another story, but I thought I would mention it here, being provided amongst others by that distinguished body, the Indian Academy of Sciences, of which C.V. Raman was such a towering figure. I asked Satish Dhawan who was really responsible for the scientific policy resolution. Now well into his retirement he was. K. Chandrasekharan and Bhabha was his reply. Chandrasekharan, who lived past his centenary year, moved to the ETH Zurich from the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research in Mumbai, an organization he should have been made the head of and should have been made the director. It was in fact slated to be, but he had to move to Zurich for personal family reasons. So intrigued, I addressed a query letter to K. Chandrasekharan at his ETH Zurich perch. I received in May 1996 from his secretary a letter to say that the scientific policy resolution of the Government of India was indeed drafted by Chandrasekharan at the instance of the late Dr. H.J. Bhabha, with two phrases amended by the cabinet. I doubt if Jawaharlal, as Bhabha addressed the PM with familiarity, ever got to know who the real drafter, author of the scientific policy resolution was. In 1977, The Janata government under Prime Minister Morarji Desai appointed Dr. Atmaram as the Vice President of CSIR and as the new chairman of the National Committee on Science and Technology, which had been in the earlier regime with Indira Gandhi being headed by C. Subramanian. Not long afterwards, in August 1977, Cabinet approved a proposal for the restructuring of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. The restructuring called for a clutch of identified laboratories of CSIR to be brought under the administrative control of what was termed as the user ministries. There were a lot of rumor, intrigue, prevarication, doublespeak, and plain lying amongst the top echelons of the scientific community, and a full narration of that would take a best-selling thriller. I might yet be the author of one. I was asked Satish Dhawan if he was considering this matter in the Indian Academy of Sciences. Something will have to be done, he answered. Maybe an academy resolution to the effect that government should consult the scientific community. They can take their own decisions. They do not have to kowtow to the scientists, but they must consult. Why don't you talk to the cabinet secretary? I made bold to suggest. Oh, they are cagey about such things. It's the old civil servant network. I think I should go and talk to the Prime Minister. I'll be ticked off by him, but so what? He proffered. Much later, in the first floor lobby of the Indian Institute of Science, I hovered a little distance away from the knot of SD, Raja Ramanna, and AK and Reddy. Ramanna handed a copy of the resolution that had earlier been passed by the Delhi-based Indian National Science Academy. It cannot just put a red line through CSIR, said SD, spreading his palm over the paper Ramanna had just handed him. Later that October, prior to a scheduled meeting of the NCST, now headed by, or deputy headed by Atmaram, SD apprised Prem Morarji Desai of the sentiment in the Bangalore-based Indian Academy of Sciences. PM Desai showed SD the speech he was to make to the NCST and asked to be pointed to any, quote, objectionable parts. There was nothing in it that I could object to, SD confided in me. There is much to say about the trio of the Department of Electronics, Science and Technology and MGK Goku Menon. And I have dilated about that in my current science piece. Here, however, is SD's account and assessment of the leadership changes in the Department of Electronics and of Science and Technology that were effected long after the new government under Prime Minister Morarji Desai took office in March of 1977. PM had called Menon and asked what he thought should be done with the DST, suggesting that he take it over. Menon asked for time to think it over, and during that time that was granted, Menon asked SD what he should do. Up to you to decide what you want to do with your life, responded SD. But if I were you, I would take it. Because if DST came under the charge of a quote, unquote, screwy character, things would be real bad. Menon accepted the DST appointment, holding temporary charge also of electronics. For the duration of his tenure as Chairman ISRO and Secretary Department of Space, the relationship between ISRO and Defence R&D on missiles remained tense at the policy level. A tenseness I now attribute as much to the not-so-hidden differences in the personalities and attitudes of Satish Dhawan and the leadership of Defence R&D as it then was, as to major disagreements on the technologies being selected in DRDO at that time for missile development. I have a program, a full one, SD continued. If they have a program, meaning DRDO, let me see it. If there is anything we can mesh in the program, we can do so. But I do not see any missile program, he said. There are a couple of other observations that are best left in the text that is to appear in current science. Kalam. For a clutch of reasons, the duo of Satish Dhawan and Director Brahma Prakash of ESSC arranged a relocation to the headquarters of ISRO in Bangalore of APJ Abdul Kalam, project director of SLV-3 and hero of the successful launch in July of 1980 of India's first satellite, Rohini. While at ISRO headquarters, Kalam was approached to check out his availability for the directorship of the Defense Research and Development Laboratory, the Missiles Laboratory of DRDO in Hyderabad. SD did not hide his skepticism of the wisdom of Kalam's inclination to accept such an invitation. Kalam sought the advice of both Rajan and myself in a brief conversation in the eat room of the old ISRO building, a conversation that is etched into both our memories. We were both unanimous in our view that Kalam should move to DRDO. It would be good for DRDO, for the country, and for ISRO. On such impromptu events in history, sometimes is history made. The late Vasant Gavarikar was the concept champion and lead designer of the solid propellant space booster plant SPROB in Sriharikota. Located on a corner of the island, SPROB casts the solid propellants in the boosters of ISRO's launch vehicles. A gargantuan facility by 1970 standards when it was first started, Gavarikar oval racetrack design bore close resemblance to that of a similar plant of Thiokol Corporation in the United States, one that cast the solid boosters and still does of the United States ICBMs. Gavarikar made a presentation on SPROB to Professor M.G.K. Menon shortly before he laid down office. Menon's reaction was what young people today would characterize as freaked out. Menon did not consider the matter again and left it to, quote, Satish to handle. SD approved the Gavarikar plan. On a late visit to Shah, I accompanied Satish Dhawan to inspect the deep, large diameter equipment caissons that the Civil Engineering Division of the department had impossibly embedded in the sandy soil to accommodate 2-meter diameter boosters. There is your silo, SD exclaimed softly, pointing into a caisson as if it was self-evidently capable of such a dual-use function. Put SLV in one of those. I have related those recollections of SPROB in the making as vividly as I am now able to provide more evidence to disabuse a belief widely held in certain policy advocating circles that because Satish Dhawan was left of center in his social attitudes, and he was transparent with that, he must have been so also against India going nuclear, if not something of being a pacifist. Not true. Not true at all. But yes, Satish Dhawan was firmly against the weaponization of space. I should like to conclude with a relatable story of what is now appositely named as Satish Dhawan Space Center. Whenever my work related to the country's space program became a little taxing, Satish Dhawan said, I went to see the birds of Shah and came back feeling happy and invigorated. In the mid-70s, Dhawan had invited Salim Ali, the legendary birdman of India, to survey the bird life of Shah. As secretary of the committee set up to review and plan the facilities at Shah, I was detailed to accompany Salim Ali with his always rung around his neck binoculars on a tour of the island. By the time we returned to base, Salim Ali had identified several bird types that Salim Ali said he had not expected to see so far south. I, of course, had only noticed a couple of crows. The cluster habitats of Shah's uncommon birds were identified and marked off limits to any brick and mortar or human intrusions. Vinod Agarwal was a social anthropologist engaged with ISRO's satellite instruction television experiment program. Satish Dhawan detailed him to conduct a social anthropological survey and study of the Yenadi tribe, the original inhabitants of Sriharikota Island, who, he regretted to his dying day, had to be moved so as to accommodate the facilities at Shah. respecting the lifestyle of Yenadis as revealed in Agarwal's survey, and their then preference to continue to live in their extant habitats on the island meant that the livability of Yenadi tribes and habitats needed to be much improved. Besides the thatch of their huts being treated with the spray on them of a special chemical which rendered them fire retardant, something that I had managed to identify in a far-out laboratory of the CSIR in the northeast of India at Jorhat, where it had been developed. Also, some of the routes of the underground's data cables had to be changed, so their routine maintenance did not cause disturbance to the Yenadi habitats. One of my dreams will have been fulfilled, Satish Dhawan said to me after approving those necessary amendments to the Shah plan, if one day a Yenadi becomes a director of Shah. That appointment is perhaps some years away yet, but in the meantime, a Nicobarese is now in charge of ISRO's ISTRAC station at Car Nicobar. I would be remiss if I did not append this afterword, which I'm now about to say. Satish Dhawan was instrumental in setting up the Test Pilot School of the Indian Air Force, as also an Institute of Aviation Medicine, which latter was upgraded to train India's first astronaut, Test Pilot Squadron Leader Rakesh Sharma. When then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi accepted, for geostrategic reasons, an offer from the then Soviet Union to fly an Indian astronaut on a Russian Soyuz space capsule to its Salyut space station, the late T.N. Seshan, then Additional Secretary in the Department of Space, informed SD that the decision, when they were both of inferior quota, Professor Dhawan spun around on his heel. Seshan related to me and exclaimed, "What?" and left directly for Delhi from Madras. India's then astronaut program with the Soviets was administered and executed by the IAF and not by ISRO. I wonder what's Professor Satish Dhawan's assessment of the scientific or even geopolitical returns from ISRO's current human space flight, which has been spoken about by the chairman of ISRO, or the Gaganath program that is doing. I have a guess answer, but I'm not sure I'm going to be right. I thank you for your time for hearing me. Thank you very much.